This was a common phenomenon also, that these vital organ transplants could be booked in advance. You could book, if you were a foreign transplanteur, a heart transplant a month in advance, 2 months in advance, which means obviously somebody was being killed. There was a date by which somebody would be killed for the organs.
Hey friends, Sean from SGTReport.com and SGTReport.tv here with an important interview with David Matas and Cyrus Parsa. You're going to want to share this one. But before we begin, just a quick word from this interview's sponsor. The consumer credit reporting agency Experian has just experienced a recent data breach that revealed the information of 24 million individuals and 800,000 businesses, exposing them to future phishing attempts. The best way to protect yourself from being a victim online to attacks like this is to use a VPN. And the VPN I use is Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield has a strict no-log policy, and it was built from the ground up specifically for privacy protection. Now, due to the recent pandemic and economic troubles, Virtual Shield is offering its services at 50% off to help customers in need to protect themselves, as well as a free 30-day trial. I'm going to leave the link to this very special offer right below this interview. Click on it, check it out, and experience for yourself why thousands of people choose Virtual Shield as their VPN. And welcome back, friends. Thank you so very much for tuning in. It's wonderful to have you guys back. You know why I say that every single time? Because it's true. Without you guys, there would be no SGT Report. For those of you that found this one, thank you so much. I think it's a very important one. Back on the line, Cyrus Parsa and author David Matas. Now, David Matas is a special guy. He focuses on the prisoner of conscious victims in China, slave labor, organ harvesting and trafficking, and so much more. First, we'll welcome Cyrus. Welcome back, Cyrus.
Hello, Sean. Thank you for having me on again. Hello to the audience.
Hey, thanks for arranging this with David. David, I don't know if you know this, but I've followed your work from a distance for a very long time, and my hat's off to you for telling the stories that can't be told by those who have been falsely imprisoned, butchered for organ harvesting in China. So thank you for joining us, David.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
All right, let me do a screen share. I think this is sort of interesting. David's book, Bloody Harvest, which he wrote with David Kilgore, is over on Amazon for $826 in paperback. I wonder if that's because Amazon doesn't want these stories told. What led you to write that book with Mr. Kilgore, Bloody Harvest?
There's a number of different reasons that kind of come together. One is that I'm a refugee lawyer, and I'm generally concerned about human rights violations which caused my clients to flee. One of the ways I try to help in a general sort of way my clients is to deal with the human rights situation which prompt flight. And over the course of my practice, I've had many prisoner of conscience victims from China making refugee claims in Canada. So I'm very sensitive to human rights violations, and I've tried to learn the lessons of the Holocaust and act on them. One of the lessons I thought I've learned is the need to act on human rights violations everywhere, and not just to be concerned about your own immediate environment. And my concern about human rights violations in China with prisoners of conscience and victims was a way for me to reach across the cultural, linguistic, geographical, spiritual divide to show solidarity with humanity as a whole. So that was another reason. Also, this particular piece of work about organ transplant abuse in China involves a lot of research because the government of China is very active in covering up the data, and there's a lot of evidence that needs to be uncovered to piece together a picture of what's happening. And I've been involved with human rights a long time with various NGOs, and my experience is that the journalistic, political NGO community, they're very good at campaigning, and they do have some research capacity, but it's relatively limited. And for intensive research, it's where it's subject to cover up and denial. It's much more difficult. And so this was something I felt, and of course I do a lot of research and writing, so I felt this was something I could do, but it was not something I was sure other people would do. So I think that was another reason I got involved in it.
David, I think most Americans are unaware of this story, and they have no idea how bad organ harvesting is in China. I mean, it's a business. Now, the Falun Gong are certainly targeted for their organs, these prisoners, but other groups are too. So tell us about that and explain to people how prevalent organ harvesting is in China.
The actual, I mean, there are transplant tourists that come from around the world to China, and the conclusion of the report that I wrote with David Kilgore is at the time, the primary victims were Falun Gong. Now there's a substantial victim number for Uyghurs as well, and there's Christians and Tibetans, house Christians that are victims, and that's why I talk about prisoners of conscience generally. But the organs, as far as I can tell, are not being shipped out of China. It's the patients who go to China who buy the organs, but they are coming from everywhere.
What kind of numbers do you think there are here? Are we talking about thousands of people? Are we talking hundreds of thousands of people? How bad is this? How widespread is this?
I mean, of course, the Chinese government doesn't produce numbers of prisoners of conscience killed for their organs. So it became, this was part of the investigation of our report. And we did look at numbers. And what we did is we looked at, David Kilgore and I and Ethan Gutman, who's a journalist who'd written a book on this issue. And with the help of some Chinese language researchers, we were looking at hospital websites and their newsletters and their bed counts and their staff counts and their purchase of anti-rejection drugs and so on. And we were just adding up figures from different hospitals, which is a very laborious task, as you can imagine. And we wrote a report that's over 700 pages, over 2,400 footnotes. And we came to the conclusion that the number of organs being harvested and transplanted each year in China from the early 2000s to the present day, in the last 19 years, was between 60 and 100,000 a year. Now that's organs, not persons, and you can extract more than one organ from a person, but the numbers are huge. And so I would say yes, in the hundreds of thousands.
All right. I'm sorry if this gets gruesome, guys, but I want to ask the question. It needs to be asked. I've heard from others that in many cases, these prisoners, they have their organs harvested while they are alive. Whether or not that's the case, and you can comment on that, the fact is that these are healthy prisoners, right? These are healthy, in many cases, younger people whose organs are being harvested, correct?
Well, indeed, the mechanics of what happens is this. China started harvesting organs from prisoners sentenced to death and then executed, and its whole system of organ harvesting was geared towards sourcing organs from prisons. And then China shifted from socialism to capitalism, which meant withdrawing money from the public sector, withdrawing money from the health sector and money from the military, which ended up running hospitals to make money. But so the health system needed replacement funds, and those replacement funds in large part came from the selling of organs. And simultaneously with this withdrawal of money from the health sector, there was a huge influx of Falun Gong prisoners detained because Falun Gong was very popular and then was banned because of its popularity, and there was protests, and people, numbers in the high hundreds of thousands, low millions were detained for the protests, and they could be released if they were recanted, but many of them didn't want to recant, and they became a sort of an indefinite, huge arbitrary detention population. And because of the propaganda against them, they were depersonalized, dehumanized, and so the jailers didn't think of them as human. The hospitals needed bodies. The prison system was set up for supplying organs for transplants. And when we began our research, China didn't have an organ distribution system or an organ donation system. So all organs had to be sourced locally. And the Falun Gong, in addition to being numerous, were everywhere in China. And everywhere in arbitrary detention in China. So they could easily be sourced locally. And of course, patients wanted healthy organs. And technology for transplantation has developed over time. But in the early 2000s, short ischemic time was important, meaning the length of time the organ is outside the body before it deteriorates. And so what they were looking for is people who were nearby, who were healthy, who had healthy organs, ideally younger people. And these people were being killed through organ extraction. There was no concern for them or their health. They were just considered expendable. And indeed, a lot of the transplants were vital organs, hearts, livers, lungs. I mean, obviously, you can't survive if you're the source of an organ transplant, a source of a heart transplant. And that was something that was occurring. And this was a common phenomenon also, that these vital organ transplants could be booked in advance. You could book, if you were a foreign transplanteur, a heart transplant a month in advance, 2 months in advance, which means obviously somebody was being killed to schedule there was a date by which somebody would be killed for the organs. So this was all happening. Absolutely, yes.
It's so disturbing. Now, you're using the past tense, but to be clear, this is still going on, and you correct me if I'm wrong about that, but let me do another screen share. This is important. All right, so it's not just Falun Gong, folks. China tells Christians to replace images of Jesus with communist president. Now, guys, if you don't think this is coming here, I would like you just to consider the fact that China would really prefer Sleepy Joe Biden to be president, because Donald J. Trump is taking the fight to the Chinese. And the reason I have Cyrus Parsa on, guys, is number one, he helped arrange this interview with David, which I really appreciate. Number two, he's our big tech expert. Now, Cyrus, in your view, Apple, which now has a $2 trillion market cap and uses what I would call slave labor to build their iPhones and their MacBooks, who do you think Apple would prefer be president?
I think they would prefer Joe Biden for sure. In fact, Apple, build their infrastructure and all their wealth based off of slave labor. Initially, Cisco helped build the surveillance systems in China. Then Google stepped in, and Eric Schmidt. So Eric Schmidt and the Google infrastructure and the training allowed the Falun Gong, the Christians, Tibetan, Uyghurs, and many other common citizens to be tracked, hunted, quarantined, and be put in these camps and later be killed for organs. So the Trump administration, in fact, has been the only administration. Clinton didn't do anything, Bush didn't do anything, and Obama. See, here's the thing. Obama got a brief when he became president, and so did Joe Biden. What was the brief? These camps are going on. We just don't mention in the front. We talk to China and behind the scenes. And what did Joe Biden do? Knowing that these camps were going on, knowing there was concentration camps, him and his son flew down, met the Chinese military and other people, took $1.5 billion and came back to the US. So imagine when the Nazis are killing the Jewish people, or in Russia, Stalin is killing the Christians, flies down and takes $1.5 billion from them. What does that make them? And do you want that as your president? I don't think so. That's what I cited in the law. Hunter Biden took that money, but Joe Biden was with him, and they knew. That's what I cited in the lawsuit, and I hinted at it in the book Artificial Intelligence: Danger to Humanity, which I put David Matas inside of, but it wasn't political. It was just fact.
But Cyrus, let me just frame that up for the audience so they understand. That was $1.5 billion for his, investment company. That was money supposedly he would manage, we're told, correct?
Not just that, but also from McVeigh Face Plus Plus. He had dealings with them. That's another company I investigated. I gave to the former director of CIA cover-ups, and it went to the White House, and President Trump banned it. McVeigh Face Plus Plus is an artificial intelligence company that used facial recognition. That was used to hunt down Uyghurs, Christians, Tibetans, and the Falun Gong, put them in camps, and kill them for the organs. Thus, all these companies need to be banned completely internationally, and need to be charged with crimes against humanity. Hence, I put that 87-page lawsuit as a framework to build this, not just to assisting in the murder, but complicity in genocide. As Mr. Matas, he's a Nobel nominee and a renowned international human rights attorney. He can tell you about the complicity clause that stems from actually the killing of the Jews in the Holocaust and the Christians by the Stalins and Lenin system. It's called Article 3 of the Genocide Convention, even Article 2 and 4, and so many other laws, Nuremberg laws and so on, as I cited in the 87-page lawsuit. Maybe he can speak to that.
Yeah, David, these are clearly crimes against humanity, and no one's going to be able to stop China from doing this, short of going to war with China. I mentioned Christians now being targeted too. Are Christians being rounded up and having their organs harvested, to your knowledge?
Yes, obviously not all Christians. The Chinese government recognizes some religions and tries to control them. And there's been a lot of negotiations with the Catholic Church about who would appoint the bishops. And the Communist Party was appointing the bishops, and I think that the Catholic Church eventually reached an agreement where they both would appoint the bishops. But typically, that's what happens with the Buddhists and Islam and so on, that they tolerate them, but appoint their own heads. And with the Tibetan Buddhists, they attempted to appoint the Dalai Lama, Panchen Lama, even though they function independently. There's a lot of house Christians. Well, they're called house Christians, but what they do is they run independently from a hierarchical system, and so that they can function on their own, and they're not subject to Communist Party control, as indeed is not the Falun Gong and or the Uyghurs, so that they become a target. And the biggest, the ones that I've heard most about is Eastern Lightning, which is a form of, it's a type of house Christian in China, and I have met Eastern Lightning victims in Japan, who, I mean, obviously I haven't met anybody who's been killed for their organs, but I meet people who go through the preliminaries, who organ tested, organ examined, arbitrarily detained, attempts at forced conversion, all this sort of stuff, dehumanization. And with Eastern Lightning, it's most systematic, but there are other house Christians that are victimized as well. It's harder to get data about the Christians because the house Christian phenomena in China is very fragmented. I mean, it's a way of survival. I mean, even with Falun Gong, there's no organization in overall globally. It's just people who do the practice, which makes it harder also to get data. But there's, I would say, generally more cohesion within Falun Gong, in the sense they have the same kind of spiritual text that they're dealing with, whereas with the house Christians, there tends to be variations in Christianity, which gives them not as much cohesion. And so the phenomenon is definitely there, but it's hard to get the numbers for the Christians.
Cyrus, I want to come back to you in just 1 second, but let me ask you this, David. As a Canadian, I can't really ask you to comment on our policies or politics in this country as it pertains to Trump or Biden. I'm not even going to ask you to do that, but I will ask you this. If communism were to flourish throughout the world and spread, like I believe the Democrats would like, they are complete Marxists in this country. In your view, what happens to humanity, what happens to our world if communism is to spread globally?
Well, as I say at the beginning, well, one of the things I've sort of had to do to get into this issue of organ transplant abuse in China is to deal with contextual issues. And although the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, is called the Chinese Communist Party, I don't view it either as Chinese or as communist or as a party. It's named Chinese, but its historical intellectual traditions are Western. Marx, Lenin, Trotsky, Engels. None of them Chinese. It's not a party in the sense that it runs in elections and to lose, maybe win. It's constitutionally considered to be the leadership of the country. So it's not a normal political party. And it's not communist in the sense that Marx and Engels talked about, which is ownership of the means of production, and in fact, if you look at the ideologues in the Chinese Communist Party, they say, well, that's, this ownership of means of production by the state is for a later stage of development, and we're not well enough developed to do that. Mao tried it, and it ground to a halt with Deng Xiaoping because it just ruined the economy. So they shifted to a capitalist economy. What we see in China now is private ownership of property, except for land, which is still state-owned, combined with total control of one political party, constitutionally embedded. And another thing Marx said was from each according to his means to each according to his needs, extreme income equality. But again, we don't see that in China. In fact, it's quite the reverse. There's extreme income inequality. So what I see is a form of governance, which is a threat to China and a threat to the rest of the world. And they certainly call themselves communists, but it isn't really the traditional communism we know from Marx and Engels. It's quite something else. And that, to a certain extent, makes what the Chinese government doing more dangerous than it used to be. Deng Xiaoping had this saying when he shifted the state from socialism to capitalism. He said that it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white, as long as the cat catches the mouse. And so what we're seeing is in his view, capitalism was a better way of catching the mouse than socialism. And in one sense, it's true, because socialism was very bad for the Chinese economy. And capitalism, once they've shifted to capitalism, their economy has become a lot stronger. And so they're better able to capture the whole of the population that way. And I think of although Deng Xiaoping wouldn't have put it this way, that the cat is the Communist Party and the mouse is the people. But the way I see it is that kind of model of governance represents more of a threat than what Maoism was doing, because Maoism, that type of communism, was just basically harmful to the economy and wasn't very enticing. Whereas this capitalism combined with this total party control is more prosperous and therefore more enticing to people in power who want to keep in power despite their lack of popularity. And what we have seen with the original communist enemies were landowners, entrepreneurs, bourgeoisie, capitalists. But now that these are kind of the heroes of the party, or certainly tolerated by the party, they've shifted basically just to anyone that's popular. And it becomes much more of a threat. And we see that with this is part of the frightening thing about the Falun Gong phenomenon or the Uyghur phenomenon. They're really post-communist or post-socialist anyways. That they're just picking on people because they question their loyalty to the party. And I would say it's a threat. I wouldn't call it a socialist or communist threat, though. I would call it a threat of a party that is determined to govern despite with using whatever means available despite its own unpopularity.
Right. What I was actually driving at, though, is the fact that, and I should have just said it, the Chinese government is anti-human in my view. Okay, you mentioned Mao, 20 to 46 million people died from 1958 to 1962 under Mao. And, what are we seeing in China now? You've got to replace images of Jesus in your home with images of the president. So in China, God is the government. And in my view, in this country, and Cyrus, maybe you want to comment on this, and David, you are welcome to jump back in if you'd like, but in my view, the Democratic Party in the United States is modeling much of what we're seeing in China. Abortion on demand in the 9th month. By the way, at their own convention, the Democrats one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. What did they say? One nation, indivisible, with liberty. They took out the God part, Cyrus. That's what I'm driving at. Even President Trump says the Chinese state media and leaders of China want Biden to win the U.S. election. That's because they know what the Democrat Party is, Cyrus. Am I overstating it?
No, you're not. But what they're doing is they have parasited off the Democrat Party. What they've done is embedded their intellectuals, their scholars, their researchers, their banking systems, their contracts, and so many businesses into the Democratic Party. And I totally agree with Mr. Matas. What he's talking about is something I mentioned in the book, Artificial Intelligence and Humanity, which is social capitalism. What the communist model is actually this. When they can't achieve full communism from socialism, what they do is parasite off and piggyback off of capitalist countries or entities. Once they use a capitalist system or a famous musician or an actor or a company and grasp and take over his resources and they embed themselves, then they transfer into a socialist structure and then it becomes full-on communism. So that's what they did with our big tech companies. They come in here, they social engineer, I'm your friend, look at this, they make this for you, and they get into a Democratic Party as well, and they bind them. Then they give Joe Biden Hunter Biden $1.5 billion. So this is called a social capital system because, like Mr. Matas said, under Mao, they failed. And then the predecessors, they failed in different ways and afterwards, right? What happened to Stalin, Trotsky, and Lenin? So they got smart. They realized the only way to see their communist goals and their dictatorship to actually come into fruition is actually embed themselves within a political and economic capitalist structure, parasite off, piggyback until they get to the top and take out everything. So with the artificial intelligence system, as it connects to a communist structure and platform all these nations with drones and robots and 5G, any government or any entity can rule the world under communism. Thus, you asked the question, what happens if Trump wins versus Biden wins? Well, if Joe Biden wins, if God doesn't show up, every person is enslaved, and maybe the human race is extincted in stages because the AI system will come in. If President Trump wins, a lot more chances will be given. That's my personal opinion. Mr. Matas is an international lawyer and a Nobel nominee. He doesn't get into politics. And he's neutral too. He helps conservatives and liberals. He's actually a great humanitarian, has worked on behalf of the Falun Gong, the Christians, Tibetans, Uyghurs, and liberal causes. And of course, he's helped Israel and America and any place that there's been atrocities. This gentleman has helped, and he's a very fair man. But I myself get a little bit political, and I will state, yes, Joe Biden is a criminal. And Hunter Biden took 1.5. If your family, let me ask you this. If your family is doing business with your neighbor that's raping somebody and then taking money, what does that make your family? And they're killing them for the organs. That's what they did. They flew down, took money from the people who are chopping up people for the organs, a communist regime. And yes, they're not full-on communists. They're communists in their moral and their ethics, which is nothing. They're culturally communists, but they're capitalists in the system, as Mr. Matas said, because they're piggybacking and parasiting off the capitalist system, what I call a social capitalist system, published in this book, until they reach full communism. That's my answer to you, and it's 100% correct.
All right, gentlemen, in the 5 or 10 minutes we have left, one more screen share here, which I think is important. This will really drive the point home, folks. For those of you who think, well, we can work with the Chinese. I mean, come on, we can all get along. Check this out. Steve Saleen. I'm not sure how many of you are car guys, but for those who are, you're familiar with the Saleen performance automobiles. Well, Steve Saleen claims the Chinese joint venture has stolen $800 million worth of his intellectual property. Now, I've been following this story, and it's true. He claims they've stolen 40 years worth of intellectual property from him, including the Celine brand in China. In 2016, he entered into a joint venture with the government of Rago, I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, a province with a population of roughly 1.4 million people. The plan was for Celine to use his experience, design, engineering, and related tech worth $800 million in the joint venture while maintaining a majority stake in the company with his American partners. Meanwhile, the local government would bring $500 million in capital and $600 million in subsidized loans over 3 years to fund manufacturing sites and operations in exchange for a minority stake. Well, guess what? They locked him out of his own factory and they kicked him out of China. They stole his brand, and what you gonna do? Who you gonna appeal to? Steve Celine got hoodwinked by the Chinese. Cyrus or David, feel free to comment on that. I just think it helps drive the point home that there's no freedom under this type of government.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know anything about the individual case, but what I do know is that there is no rule of law in China, that the Communist Party is in control of everything to do with the legal system. It's control of the courts, the judges, the police, the investigators, the prosecutors, even the defense bar. And the party doesn't use the law, obviously, against itself. And the party is not like, well, in Canada or the US, a political party is mostly volunteers. It has some paid staff. But if they get elected, the people who run the government are the people in the government. But in China, it's a very different system. All throughout China, everybody in government has somebody from the Communist Party who's basically telling them what to do. It's a huge tentacular system, and the government people can say one thing, and if the party doesn't like it, it just won't happen. And the government people can promise something, and if the Communist Party handlers don't agree with the promise, it's not respected. And there's no recourse, because if you go to a Chinese court, the court will just do what the party, the designated party official for the judge tells the judge to do. So I would say that anybody who has anything to do with the Chinese legal system does so at their peril. And is also is a particular problem for, well, the field that I've been dealing with, organ transplant abuse, because mass killing by state institutions, there's no one to prosecute for those crimes, because the people who are committing these crimes are acting on the instructions of the party.
It's also horrifying. It's amazing that this is the world in which we live in 2020. You know, it really is. Isn't it amazing? I've often said, David, that the world could be an Eden if the people who controlled it were benevolent dictators as opposed to the malevolent dictators they are. And maybe that's just human nature. Maybe at the end of the day, greed and avarice and evil is just human nature. I don't personally believe that. I think that those things are taught. I think those things can be indoctrinated into people. And the number one way you do that is you remove God from the conversation. You separate human beings from their creator. Final word from you, David, and then we're going to promote your books, because I sure would like people to support you in any way they can. But do you think I'm right about that?
Well, as I said, I was very kind of driven to get involved in human rights from my awareness of the Holocaust. And what we saw with the Holocaust is basically there's no bottom level of depth of evil to which humanity can sink. That the possibility of wrongdoing by not just people in control, but by individual human beings is kind of endless. I wouldn't say it's either hopeless or hopeful. I think we're in a constant struggle day by day everywhere in the world to try to make things better or to prevent things from getting worse. And that's basically all that we can do. I mean, we can't remove hatred from the world, because hatred's a basic human emotion. And we can't remove disinformation or incredulity or stupidity, all of these things, because they're just part of humanity. All we have to do is our best try to make things not as bad as they otherwise would have been, and maybe hopefully make things a little bit better.
Cyrus, thank you so much for setting this interview up today with David. I'll give you the final word, and then we're going to promote David's books and help people find them. Cyrus, final word from you on big tech, Google, Facebook, Twitter, Apple. It's no wonder these tyrannical fascist companies want Joe Biden to win.
Mr. Matas has been working on this since the year 2005 with David Kilgore. I've been working on organ harvesting and sex and human trafficking awareness since about the same time, since 2006 and so on. I think one of the main reasons the world is facing all these atrocities, sex, human, and organ trafficking, is because of our complicity and our being quiet. Like almost we had a mask on for almost 20 years, allowing these big tech companies to transfer technology, do trade with them, and off slave labor and organ harvesting, take this wealth back to these countries. If you believe in a God and there is such thing as a sinful nature, that's great sin, or that the Buddhists will call it great karma. Or you can say it's cause and effect, or chain of reaction. In fact, I see as a great resemblance of wearing these masks. Our media wore these masks for 20 years and was quiet. Now everybody is wearing a mask. So my answer is this, to your previous question and to what we should do. Every person from the bottom of the heart, they should look inside and ask themselves, why were they complicit, and ask for forgiveness. Millions of people have been killed for the organs, and our trade has had something to do with that. And a lot of people flew down from Canada, the US, and Europe and got organ transplants and all over the world. Okay. And these were people that got chopped up for the organs because they wouldn't recant their faith in God. That's what the issue was. Christians, they wouldn't recant. The Falun Dafa, they believe in Jin Shan, truth, compassion, forbearance. They would not recant their faith in God as well. So it has to do with God. And you don't believe in God, and you take it out of the spirit, people don't believe in ethics and morality anymore. You become like animals. You chop up people for the organs. Thus, every person, second, expose the Chinese Communist Party, expose them for this organ harvesting, share this video everywhere. Third, everybody in this world, deep down, we're meant to be good. We should wish for a great, peaceful future for humanity. We want a great awakening of enlightenment, of peace, of goodness, of good nature. That's what I want to end with.
Well, thank you for that, Cyrus. I really appreciate your time, and thanks for helping us set this up. Real quickly, the name of your book and how do people get it?
Oh, my book is Artificial Intelligence, Dangers to Humanity. Get it off Amazon. Sean will have a link, paperback, or you can download it from my website. Sean will also have a link as well. Bloody Harvest, the contents of that is actually inside of here, very important points of it, including Mr. Matas and Kilgore. His book, Bloody Harvest, it's actually for $20. I think somebody put that up there as a used one to deter people from buying it.
Well, so that's the point. That's the point, Cyrus. I just want to show this. This is how Amazon operates. You do a search for David's book, and what do you get? One paperback copy for $890. It's a little bit like they do with my content on YouTube. It's out there, but you have to search for it because the first results won't be what they should be. David, I'm going to come back to you, and I want you to tell us how we can support you and how do we find your books?
Yeah, well, I have got 11 different books on various human rights subjects. The Bloody Harvest is actually, sure, if you want to buy a hard copy, it's $20, but if you want to download it, you don't have to pay anything. It's available at the publisher's website, Seraphim. It's also available at the website of the NGO, International Coalition to End Transplant Abuse in China. Their website address is endtransplantabuse.org. There's another book that I did, a collection of essays on this issue, which was co-edited with Torsten Trey, who set up an NGO on the issue, Doctors Against Forced Organ Harvesting, and the title of that book is State Organs, and that also was published by Seraphim. I mean, these books are available at various sites. You can also, of course, just go to a bookstore and ask them to order it in, and they will do so. That's what I would suggest. I guess the most recent book I wrote was I wrote an autobiography called "Why Did You Do That?" And because I mean that's a question you asked me about why I got involved in this, and so I have a chapter about why I got involved in this particular issue, and different chapters about why I got involved in the various issues I got involved in. Those are three of the more recent books I've done.
Well, thank you so very much for your time today. I really very much appreciate it, David. You're obviously a wonderful person. You don't even care about people buying the book. You're telling them they can go get it for free. The information is so important. I hope they do that. I have a very supportive audience. And Cyrus, your book too, people can check that out. It's easy to find on Amazon, Artificial Intelligence, Dangers to Humanity. Our guests have been Cyrus Parsa. Thank you, Cyrus. And David Matas. Thank you so much, David.
Yes, thank you for inviting me.
It's my pleasure. And guys, thank you so very much for tuning in. Thank you for liking this information and sharing it within your sphere of influence. We know Google doesn't want you to do it. YouTube certainly doesn't want you to do it. Who owns YouTube? Google. Number 1 and number 2 most trafficked websites on planet Earth, and they don't want this information getting out. Friends, for real news, I'll remind you, visit us directly at sgtreport.com, the antidote to corporate propaganda 24/7. God bless you one and all. Bye-bye.
And when you're an empty vessel with no real principles and no real beliefs in life, but you have been convinced to go through with these rituals in the streets every night, these crazy Lord of the Flies rituals in the streets every night, you actually end up worshiping things you didn't even know that you worshiped.